Hey everyone, Cleo here, and today we're going over my reading stats for 2021. We're specifically going to zoom in on Q4, so I've been doing these quarterly updates all throughout 2021, so it's time to talk about Q4, but I will also be talking about the year to date, or in this case, the full year stats. Now, I'll only be talking about specific stats, I'll only be talking about stats that are linked to my reading goals. I don't know yet whether I'm going to do like a separate video talking about more in-depth statistics or not, because I kind of still need to fill in all of that details into my spreadsheet, and so I'm not entirely sure whether I actually want to bother or not. So it might come, it might not come. But so in any case, let's go through my reading year based on the reading goals that I set myself at the beginning of the year and figure out whether I was able to stick with them for the entirety of the year. So first up, let's talk about the number of books. Now, the number of books for me is basically my least important goal. I just put one on there every year because I do like to see that number climbing in the Goodreads challenge. And so this year, as previous years, I've set it to 52 books. And in Q4, I managed to read 28 books towards that goal, but I had actually already reached the goal in Q2. In total, in 2021, I got around to reading 100 books. This wasn't particularly my goal, but like with a few days left in the year, I was at 99 and I was like, I need to make that 100 book happen. There's just some sort of a compulsion to hit 100 when you're that close that I wasn't able to escape. But if you've been following my channel, then you'll know that one of my main goals for 2021 and still my main goal for 2022 is getting around to all of my unread books. Now in 2021, I was not going to reach that final goal. I already knew that from the get-go. And so my goal was to get under 40 unread books on my shelves. In Q4, I did a huge reduction in the number because I also did a massive unhaul. And so I was able to reduce the overall amount of unread books on my shelves by 20 books. In total, in the year 2021, I was able to reduce the physical TBR by 49 books, and I ended up the year at 35 unread books, so I was able to achieve my reading goal, which I'm very happy about. It was the main sort of goal that steered my reading. And definitely I wasn't just solely reading books off of these shelves, so I wasn't solely focused on that reading goal, but it definitely was front and center in my mind most of the time. I was always trying to make sure that while reading certain new books or while buying new books, I was also making sure to get enough other books read so that the overall number could go down. And so a reduction by 49 books, I'm very happy with that. That is more or less half of what I read throughout the year. And as we will see later, part of that number is also just due to the fact that I did also buy new books in the totality of the year as well. The second sort of like primary goal was to focus on fantasy. I love fantasy, but in the past few years, I feel like I haven't really had time, or I haven't really made time for fantasy. I've kind of been prioritizing shorter, quicker reads, or I've been prioritizing literary fiction over fantasy, and I wanted to see that change in 2021, and that definitely ended up happening. Now, in terms of the numbers, I told myself that I wanted to get to 50% fantasy, but I am going to make a distinction here between the amount of pages and the amount of books. So Q4 surprisingly turned out to be the quarter in which I read the least fantasy. Only 28% of what I read book-wise in Q4 were fantasy books. And in terms of pages, that is like just under 40%. 39.6% of what I read in Q4 was fantasy. I was quite surprised by that number. So much so that I even went to check the raw data to be sure that I hadn't like misgenred certain of these books, because I really wasn't expecting it. I didn't have the feeling that I had been reading less fantasy in Q4, but it did definitely turn out to be correct. Now, don't get me wrong, this is not because, I was upset about the fact that I hadn't managed to prioritize fantasy in that fourth quarter. I just didn't have the feeling like Q4 was low on fantasy, but it turned out that it was. Now, for the totality of 2021, those numbers, of course, are more important. Did I, in the long run, when you look at all of these quarters together, did I manage to achieve this goal? And there are two possible answers there. In terms of the overall amount of books, I read 41% fantasy. So to some extent a fail, because I had said 50%. I'm still quite happy with 40% because that still means that I got around to a decent amount of fantasy. But what's more important here is the page percentage. Because in terms of page count, I did get around to 53% fantasy, and that makes sense because fantasy books just tend to be longer. And as I indicated in previous quarterly updates, when I'm reading a lot of fantasy, I'm also a lot of times compensating with shorter works when it comes to the other genres that I'm reading from. So a lot of times I'll be prioritizing shorter literary fiction to balance out those longer fantasies. So I'm very happy with 53% page count overall. But for 2022, I don't even remember whether I put sort of like percentage rules on it, so I'll have to rewatch my own reading goals video, but definitely the goal is to focus on translated fiction this year, and I'm going to try and kind of balance out the genres. So I do still want to make sure that I'm getting around to like 35 or 40% fantasy, aside from focusing on translated fiction and literary fiction as well. Now those were the two reading goals that had like the biggest impact on my reading year. They had the biggest impact on my reading choices, but I definitely also had a few sort of like minor sort of goals. So I had like 2 list videos at the beginning of the year. So one was the 12 books for 2021 video. So I had done this video a few years in a row, and most years I ended up pretty much failing or like just passing because I only got around to like at the most half of those books, because most of those times I would be compiling these lists and then totally forgetting about them. And Notion definitely made a change to that in my reading year 2021, because I kept that list of 12 books on my Notion page, and so I was constantly visually reminded of the fact that I had those books to get around to. Plus, I also gave myself further rewards for finishing them. I have this book buying credit system in which each book that I read earns me credits that I can then use to haul books. And I was giving myself more credits for finishing the books on that list, and as a result, I have also finished all of them. So in Q4, I managed to finish 3 out of those 12, and those are the final 3 I had to finish. So in the end, I managed to finish all 12 of those books in 2021. Not all of them were fully read. I did DNF 1, I think. I think I only DNF 1, perhaps 2, but those still count. I did still make a progress in them. You know, I did still make a decision on them. Similarly, I also had a list of 6 classics that I wanted to get to in 2021. Now, I already indicated that that was a lower priority for me. I put more emphasis on the 12 books for 2021 video than I did on the classics. And so from the get-go, it was a sort of goal that I would be happy to reach, but I didn't feel like compelled to reach, or I didn't put as much emphasis on for myself to be able to complete it. And as a result, I also did not complete it, depending on your point of view. So in Q4, I read 1 of these 6, but at that point in time, I had finished 5 out of the 6, and the 6th book, so the one that would have made this challenge complete, I unhauled it. So I did not even read it. I did not even read a single page, I think, of the book. I unhauled it before even starting it, because I decided that I just didn't have enough of an interest in this book to want to read it in the end. And so to an extent, I was successful. I made a decision on that book. I more or less basically scrapped it from that list of books that I wanted to read in 2021. But you can be the judge of whether I finished that challenge or not. In any case, for me, it's not all that important. So I still consider it a win. And then the final statistic to look at is the amount of books that I hauled. So because I'm trying to reduce the amount of unread books on those shelves, it is of course important, or it was of course important for me to manage what was coming in. At the same time, I also did not want to keep myself from buying new books neither, because I knew that that was just going to be a way for me to give up on it immediately. If I wasn't going to allow myself to buy a book here or there, I might just like start resenting that challenge. I might be like, ugh, I really want this book, damn this stupid challenge, I'll just do it in any case, and you know, I'll forget about my challenge altogether. So for me, it was a better idea to kind of curb what I was buying, to make sure that there were rules in place, to make sure that I couldn't go all out and get like endless amounts of books. There definitely was a system in place. I will say that, could I have done a little bit better than I ended up doing? Perhaps. I mean, definitely I could have done better, but I don't know whether I would have stuck with it, because I definitely feel like towards the second half of the year, it was getting so much more difficult to maintain those rules, to keep myself from that expense, to keep myself from buying new books, to keep myself from indulging in new books every once in a while. So I definitely think that it was bound to happen. So in Q4, I hauled 6 books, and I think that that is more or less the average for the quarters. In any case, I know that in Q3 I also hauled 6 books, and mathematically speaking, that is also more or less the average. In total, in 2021, I added 22 books to my TBR, so 22 books that I bought that I hadn't read yet before. So as I said, that number could have been lower because, you know, in total, I reduced my bookshelves by 49 books, but I did also have to compensate for the fact that I was buying 22 books throughout 2021. So I could have, of course, reduced it by more if I hadn't bought those books. In the end, I feel like not having bought those books would have just been to the detriment of the challenge altogether, that it would have slowed down my pace, for example, or that would have completely demotivated me. Out of the 6 that I hauled, I only got around to 1 in Q4, and that's probably the lowest number it's been in any of the quarters. Most of the quarters in which I bought books, I have been able to read more of them within the same quarter already, and that's also because the goal of buying books was to get around to them more quickly. If I was going to buy books, if I was going to add books to the collection, even though I was trying to reduce the collection, it had to be books that I was super excited about. It had to be books that I was planning on reading immediately. And this statistic is somewhat skewed because almost all of these books were added to my TBR in December. The only one that wasn't added is the one that I read. So I bought 1 book in October, immediately read that one, and then I also added 5 books in December, and none of those 5 books got read. So that also means that I failed another one of my reading goals, because another one of my reading goals was that every book that I bought in 2021, I wanted to have read in 2021. And so that's not the case. Out of the 22 books that I added in 2021, I have read 15. I still think it's a nice statistic, especially knowing that 5 out of those 7 remaining books were added in December. Because that still means that those 5 books had been on my TBR for less than a month when the end date arrived. And for all 7 of these, it's actually the case that they've been on my TBR for less than 6 months at this point in time. So I'm still quite happy with what ended up happening there. I'm still happy with the choices that I made. The books that I ended up buying that I haven't read yet, I do see how all of these happened, or I do see why I didn't get around to all of these. Most of these are sort of like exceptions, you know. One of these is an edition that was hard to find, so I bought it knowing full well that I probably wasn't going to get around to it anymore that year. Another one was a book that I saved from a friend, for example. There's a book that I was gifted for Christmas. There are 3 books that I purchased in a special edition as well, so I had to buy them at that point or they would no longer be available later on. And then there's 1 book that I bought in a sale, which is like the only book for which I feel like maybe I could have left that one off, but at the same time, I'm not going to beat myself over that one neither. So 7 books that I'm taking into 2022, but as previously indicated, in 2022, I will be working further on reducing those unread books on my shelves. And the goal is to reach 0 TBR. The goal is to finish all of these, and preferably I will do that within the first 6 months of the year, which would still mean that those 7 books that I have left from 2022 will in totality be on my TBR for less than a year. So that's my sort of like caveat to that goal, but yes, I failed that goal. I did not end up achieving it, but I definitely do still think that in spirit of the challenge, I did pretty well, because the main idea behind this challenge was to make sure that I wasn't just impulse buying. And I do think that because of this challenge, all of my decisions were conscious decisions. When buying books, I was really thinking about, okay, do I need this book now? Can this book wait until after I've finished my 0 TBR project? If I'm not going to be reading it in the next few months, is it worth me buying it now, or shouldn't I just wait until after I've reached 0 TBR? And so for all of these 7, there is an explanation for why that didn't end up happening. Now, in all other quarters, I have done a best book and worst book sort of overview as well, which I think I'm not going to include here. I do not have a best book for this quarter, as in I don't have a book in this quarter that ended up on my best books of the year video. I think if I have to give a best book for quarter 4, it will probably be The Glass Castle by Jeanette Walls, which was a memoir, and that really moved me, and you know, I was very much emotionally engrossed in that book and really was a page turner for me. And then in terms of my worst book, there are many options I can go with there, because I did DNF 2 books more out of this interest than out of like any sort of real resentment towards the book or anything like that. So I DNF'd A Winter's Promise by Christelle Daveu, and I also DNF'd Congo by David van Reybrouck. But I think the one that I kind of resent the most would be Cytonic by Brandon Sanderson, just because I love Brandon Sanderson and I loved Skyward, the first book in that series. And so I was just hoping for so much, and I did not get what I was hoping for. So it was also a book in which I was kind of disinterested, which is a big problem, and considering the fact that I started off the series really loving that first book. It's really a decline in the series for me if I love the first book and find myself not caring anymore by book 3. So in the end, I did give you a best book and a worst book for Q4, I guess. If you want to see my best books of 2021, I did already film that video, and that video is already available to you guys as well. My worst books of the year video I still need to film, so I'm expecting to still be able to post it in January, but that will kind of depend on my work ethic and my procrastination, I guess. But so, let me know how your final months of the year went. Were you able to end the year on a good note, and were you able to achieve the goals that you had set yourself? I'm very happy with how 2021 went, and I'll be even happier if I manage 0 TBR in 2022. But so yeah, with that I'm gonna round off this video. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and see you guys for the next one. Bye!